There are, well, there's really 4 ways, but there are several ways that we can solve quadratic equations. For quadratic equations, we have several different ways that we can solve. So, I'm going to do a few problems from this worksheet. You may have already done these problems. If not, skip to the ones that I'm working on. And I'm just going to use those kind of like as our notes. We're not really going to do exactly notes because this should be a review, although I'm worried that maybe completing the square might not be a review for all of you. So, so like we did number 5, we've got x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. So we could use quadratic formula to solve this because the quadratic formula will work for any quadratic. It does not matter what type of quadratic you have. So, so we could use quadratic formula. However, this particular problem will factor. If I have x and x, what numbers could I use to get an 8? Plus 4 plus 2. And so this is equal to 0, so you're setting each one of these equal to 0. A lot of you don't write this step, that's fine. So x would equal -4, and x would equal -2. So quadratic formula will work, but if you recognize that it'll factor, factoring's a lot faster than quadratic formula. Okay, yes. No, not all of them will factor. So like number 1 does not factor. So you have to either use quadratic formula or completing the square. But like number 5 does factor. I'm pretty sure 7 will factor. 4 factors, 6 factors. So if you recognize that it will factor, go ahead and factor it because it's a lot faster. But if you try like number 1, you're going to have p squared plus 14p minus 38 equals 0. Well, if you try to factor it, you got your p and your p. 38, like you can multiply 19 and 2, 38 and 1. I think that's all that'll go into it. Neither one of those is going to give you 14, right? So factoring is not going to get you anywhere. So if you use quadratic formula on that, you would have x equals -b. Your a is 1, your b is 14, your c is -38. So it would be -b, which is -14, plus or minus the square root, b squared, 14 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1 here, times b, which is -38, all over 2 times a, which is 1 here. Okay, you guys remember doing this? Everybody saying quadratic formula? I've done it before. Most students are pretty good at doing quadratic formula. I do not want decimal answers on these. I want exact answers, which means they're still going to have the square root in them, unless they come out as perfect squares like number 5 would if you had used quadratic formula. You get whole numbers on that. But don't give me decimal answers. So you can type 14 squared minus 4 times 1. I'm going to write the times 1 times -38. You can type it in. You get 348. So you have -14 plus or minus the square root of 348 all over 2. Most students can get here just fine. The problem with this is now we've got to simplify. 348 is not a super easy one to simplify. Let's see what goes into it. Nope, 348. 16, no, 38. goes into it, I know. Is it just 4? Yeah, probably so. 87's not going to break down. So you got negative 14 plus or minus square root of 4 times 87 over 2, which is negative 14 plus or minus 2 root 87 over 2. And then you have to simplify this. You're looking at these 3 numbers right here. They have to all be divisible for you to reduce. They are in this case. So you would have negative 7 plus or minus 1 square root of 87 over 1 if you divide all those numbers by 2. But we would write it negative 7 plus or minus square root of 87. Yes?
I got 344 times square root of 348.
It should be 348. So, 14 squared.
It's 196 minus 4 plus 152. It's before you times before by the 38.
Yeah, so you would have 196 plus 152. You should get 348. I think you just got mixed up there.
Do not minus.
You do not minus the 4.
Minus 4 times 1.
You don't go left to right. You got to do order of operations. You got to multiply this stuff right here together first. So, yeah. So, or you can just type the whole thing in. The calculator can handle it. If you just type it in, 14 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 38. Type in the whole thing at one time. It'll give you the right answer. The only thing you have to be careful about is if that's a negative, like if you're doing negative 14 squared, the calculator will lie to you. It should be positive, so you got to put parentheses if you type in a negative, negative 14 squared. Okay, you're not on this one. Okay, so I don't like doing quadratic formula on this problem because, like I said, most students can get right here with no problem, but it's getting right here that is difficult. So I prefer a method called completing the square on this type of problem. Now there's some times where I would rather use quadratic formula. So have you guys seen completing the square before? Have you heard that before? Coach Wood's babies should have seen it. I think he said he did it last year. All right, so completing the square. The idea behind completing the square comes from this. If I've got 3x plus 1 squared, all right, I have many times been saying square, double, square. Okay, so what I mean by that, some of you are still writing out 3x plus 1 times 3x plus 1. Alright, and you multiply. 3x times 3x is 9x squared. 3x times 1 is 3x. 1 times 3x is 3x. And 1 times 1 is 1. And so that would be 9x squared plus 6x plus 1. Right, so that is one way to work that out. Or, you have probably heard me say several times that you could square, double, square. So when I say square, double, square, what I mean is I take this first term, 3x, and I square it. That gives me 9x squared. I take the middle I take both terms and I multiply them together. That gives me a 3x, and I double that, which would give me 6x, right? So double is just multiplying by 2. So if I had 3x, I double it, I get 2. I get 6x. And then I square this last one right here, 1 squared is 1. Notice this is the same thing as what I got when I did it the long way. All right. So like if I wanted to square double square 2x minus 7 squared. If I wanted to square double square. Who thinks they can do this in their head without having to write it out? Anybody want to try it? All right. What do you think, Major?
2x squared.
Good. There you go. All right.
14, 28x.
Good. Perfect. Okay, so what he's doing there, although he faltered a little at first, but he recovered quickly. 2x squared is going to give you 4x squared, because you got to square the number and the x. Then, you heard him say 1428. All right, so he's multiplying these two together. 2 times 7 is 14. Double it, you get 48. It's always going to have the same sign right here. And then we square the last one. Negative 7 squared is positive 49. Right? So if we tried another one in our heads, x minus 9 squared. Okay, so if we're square, double square, who wants to try this one? All right, Bo?
X squared minus 18x plus 81.
Okay, very good. Square, double square. X squared is x squared. X times 9 is 9x. Double it, you get 18. 9 times 2 is 18. And then square the last, you get 81. Okay, that's perfect. All right, what about if I had 5x plus 2 squared? Who else wants to try this one for me besides Bo? Or Major, who have already proved themselves? All right, try it, Matthew.
25x squared plus 20x plus 4.
Perfect. Very good. Okay, so again, square the first. That gives you 25x squared. Multiply these together. It's going to give you 10x. Double it to get 20. And then square the last, which is 4. Right, so square, double, square. So, with square, double, square, the reason we double the middle is because when you multiply these together, those middle two terms are always the same every time if you're squaring a binomial, right? So we multiply we just double whatever you get when you multiply those together, and that gives us what we've got here. So this is a good shortcut that just helps you, in general, just be faster doing these problems so that you don't get caught up on little things. It's also essential to understand this to understand how to complete the square. Okay? So, I'm going to kind of like walk you through a few things before we get to actually solving the whole problem, which we'll hopefully do in the next 10 minutes. So, let's say that I've got x squared plus 6x plus, something here. I don't know what it needs to be. If I want this to be a square, double square problem, right? If I want this to be, in fact, I'll go ahead and give you this. It's going to be x plus 3 squared, right, on this one. What number needs to be here? A 9, right? Okay, now let me give you a little bit more difficult. What if I've got x squared plus 10x plus blank equals x plus blank squared? Okay, if I put 25 here, what number would need to go right here? Why? Because this was my double right here in the middle, right? So to find what goes here, I had to take half of it, right? So what about if I had x squared minus 48x plus blank equals x plus blank squared? Okay, where does the 24 go? It does not go right here.
Inside of the.
It goes right here. Because this part right here, 48, is your double. So you take half of it, that gives you the number that goes right here. What number would go here? Not 76. It's going to be 24 squared. What, somebody did that for me. 576. Oh, somebody. Sorry, I just heard the 76. It makes sense now. Yeah, 576 is correct. Sorry about that. So, yes.
So, it was a negative 48. So,
Oh, yeah.
would that make the 24 and negative?
You're exactly right. That should be a negative right there. So really, I mean, it'd look prettier if I'd written it like this, wouldn't it? If I'd put a minus there to begin with. So yes, this sign has to match this sign right here. Good.
I'm just confused because if you say double it, wouldn't that make it a positive? Or you just times it by
Times 2. So double is times 2. So it's going to keep that same sign, but squaring it is always positive. That's why no matter whether I have a plus or minus here, these numbers were all positive. So it is easy to get mixed up because doubling and squaring kind of seem like they're the same thing, but they are not. So doubling is just times 2. Okay, so here's how this works. Let's go back to this. Well, let's do problem 3. That way you've got one more done for your assignment. So 3. We've got a squared plus 14a minus 51 equals 0. So we could use quadratic formula. That one might even factor. I think 17 and 3 is going to work there. We won't do factor, but it's okay. We'll do one more. So I could use quadratic formula. Quadratic formula always works. I think this one will factor. But let's complete the square for this. So this is how you complete the square. The first thing you want to do is you want to move the constant term over to the other side. So I'm going to do a squared plus 14a plus blank equals, this is going to be a positive 51 whenever I move it here. And I'm going to put a plus blank right here too. So my goal here in completing the square is I want a perfect square trinomial. I want a square double square. So I want this to be a plus something squared equals something over here. All right. So what we're doing is just what I was doing with those blank spots. I need to think, don't worry about this side just yet. If I've got 14 here, what number goes right here? A 7. What number should go in this blank spot right here? 49. Okay, so every time you're just dividing by 2 to get the number that goes right here, and then you're raising to the second power to get the number that goes here. Now, I just put a 49 on the side of the equation that wasn't there before. So I can't just go like adding 49 to one side unless I also add it to the other side, which is why I put this blank right here. So I'm going to put this plus 49 right here. So that's why I put blanks on both sides. We can't just put a number right here. So 51 plus 49 is going to give us 100. And at this point, we have a quadratic equation that we can solve without having to factor. Okay, so if I'm solving a plus 7 squared equals 100, I could square root both sides. And so when I square root the square, I just get a plus 7 equals, what's the square root of 100? 10. But what do I need in front of it if I square root both sides? Plus or minus 10. And so the 7 needs to be moved over to the other side. So I would subtract it. So I got plus or minus 10 minus 7. You don't want to leave your answer like this because those are both whole numbers. So what this means is you've got positive 10 minus 7. So one of the answers is 3. And you have negative 10 minus 7. So the other answer is negative 17. We'll stick with the odds because I'm going to sign the odds. So let's do do 11. This will probably we're going to do 11 fast. I don't know. Hold on, let me think this real quick. Now, we cannot, whether it's quadratic formula or completing the square, you need to move everything to one side first. So k squared minus 4k, add that 5. Put that together, you get your 6. If you're completing the square, though, I guess you could have done it this way. You're going to move that 6 over to the other side. So you got plus blank equals negative 6 plus blank. Okay? We want to factor this. K minus blank squared here. So what number goes in this bottom part here? It'll be 2, because it is half of 4, right? That we're undoing our double. What number goes in this top blank right here? 4. 2 squared is 4. If I add 4 to this side, I got to add 4 to this side, which gives me a negative 2 right here. And I wanted to do 11 because if I'm solving this to get rid of a square, I square root. Look what happens here. I got a negative under square root. What do I have to put for that? I. So I've got plus or minus I root 2. And then last step, because you're trying to get that k by itself, is just to add 2. Typically, we'll write it this way. We'll put the 2 first, plus or minus I root 2. You cannot simplify it any further, so you just leave it. Okay, so homework, I want you guys to do number 1 through 19 odd. Okay, you may use any method that you like. So if the stuff that I was just showing you looked like nonsense and you need to revert back to quadratic formula for the homework, that's okay. All right. The answers are on Canvas. If you click on this assignment and scroll down, because it's going to look blank at first, the answers are on there, or just Google it. These worksheets have the answers up there. So 1 through 19 odd is what you're going to do for this worksheet. And make sure you get a wipe to wipe off your desk.